Okay, in theory, everything should be working. Or not. Yes. Okay, I think everything's working. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure everyone already read the professor's Wikipedia page, but just for others who haven't, or for new guests, if we have some new guests, Professor Eichengreen, I'm not so sure how you pronounce it.
That's good.
Eichengreen is a professor at Berkeley. He used to work for the IMF, and he's the president of the he was the president of the Economic History Association. He's published more than 20 books. I even saw some in German, translations, or if you wrote them in German, and numerous articles on economy. And today we're here with him to talk about his wonderful book, Exorbitant Privilege. And I think I'm going to pass the microphone to the professor, just to give us a general, just to tell us what he thought was the most important, or the most important points in the book.
Yeah, so let me start by saying it's nice to be here. Every couple of years, I teach a course in the economics department at Berkeley for PhD students, where we read a book in economic history each week and critique it. In economics departments these days, people read and publish articles. They don't read books so much. So I like to alert the students to the value of books as a way of communicating ideas, and I commend you for doing the same. The other thing we've discovered is in the era of Zoom, we can have the authors of the books join us and talk about them. So we do very much the same thing that you do. The central theme of Exorbitant Privilege is that there is an imbalance or a tension between our increasingly multipolar global economy, where there are three large economies: the United States, the European Union, and China, and a host of other consequential economies. There's a tension between the multipolar nature of the global economy and the dollar-dominated or dollar-centric nature of the global monetary and financial system. And if anything, this phenomenon of dollar dominance has grown even more pronounced in the decades since I published the book. So many economists are talking about why the dollar is so dominant today, and they're inquiring into what kind of problems that creates for the global economy, specifically the fact that the global economy needs liquidity, it needs finance. Liquidity greases the wheels of globalization, but the US, which accounts for a shrinking share of the global economy as emerging markets emerge and China grows, the US can't provide that liquidity, those safe financial assets, all by itself indefinitely. So that raises the question of what comes next and how we get from here to there. That, in a nutshell, is what the book is about.
I'm pretty sure that in different parts of the book, you do mention that you predict that in a not so distant future, there will be a multipolar world. And actually, you say that it's a normal thing to have different currencies, different, not sure if I can say dumb currencies. Mm-hmm. But I was just wondering, I'm actually going to pivot to another question. So since all of us live in Europe, we were actually wondering what effect, or because like in the book you say that the euro could have been a formidable rival to the dollar had the UK adopted, or had the UK not opted out. And we were wondering what you thought, or what you think now that the UK left. So what kind of considerations or what kind of observations would you have? It's a really strange question, but it's just something that we kept on talking about.
No, not strange at all. I think the candidates to rival the dollar or coexist with the dollar on the global stage are the Chinese renminbi and the euro. Only the euro area and China have the necessary economic scale and engage in the necessary volume of commercial and financial transactions across borders. So the euro is a candidate. The problem is basically that in international and reserve currency, there has to be enough of it out there in order for central banks and corporate financial managers, corporate treasurers, and others to hold it. And if you look at how many AAA rated government bonds, the bonds have to be AAA rated in order to be safe and widely held. The volume of AAA government bonds in the euro area is about a quarter the volume of AAA government bonds issued by the US government. And a lot of what's been issued in the euro area has been hoovered up by the European Central Bank through quantitative easing, or has to be held by Europe's own banks to satisfy their capital and regulatory requirements. So the first thing that Europe has to do for the euro to rival the dollar is not to attract Great Britain back in, but rather to move away from what has been a bank-based financial system toward a capital markets-based financial system, more bonds, in other words. And there's a project in Europe called Capital Markets Union designed to do that. So it needs to get serious about capital markets union. And I think issuing more AAA-rated government bonds, the recovery fund agreed to last year, the 850 billion euro recovery fund, bonds are going to be AAA rated, backed by the full faith and credit of all EU members. That potentially is another important step down that road. So that I think the euro will eventually become a more consequential international and reserve currency. So the first rule of forecasting is give them a forecast or give them a date, but never give them both. So I've given you a forecast.
Wow, that was really interesting. Sorry. Before answering the question about the euro, you were talking, because your book actually does predict that the dollar will slowly lose relevance. I'm not sure if I could say it that way. And as one of the first things you said, or first statements, you said that actually the dollar has gained prominence in these 10 years, I could say. How would you explain this? I'm not sure if I could say this difference from your guess or your educated guess, or I'm not sure if my question is clear. I'm just a bit nervous. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that is perfectly clear. I predicted 10 years ago in Exorbitant Privilege that we would move toward a more multipolar global monetary and financial system, and I'll keep predicting it until I'm right. It just hasn't happened yet. And I think that reflects the euro crisis, the problems that Europe has experienced starting in 2010. They began to erupt in Greece right when the book went off to the publisher. So that was news to all of us. And China is making a concerted effort to internationalize the renminbi, but there are all kinds of obstacles, ranging from China's own capital controls, which makes it hard to get your hands on its currency or invest in its assets, to political considerations. People don't want to hold and use the currency of an autocratic country where the president or the Politburo can change the rules of the game unilaterally. Why? So part of the answer to why the dollar has become more dominant is that the alternatives have not stepped up yet. And the other part of the answer is that we've been through a really volatile decade with the global financial crisis and the euro crisis and the COVID crisis. The market in US Treasury bonds is the single most liquid financial market in the world. And what do investors value in a crisis? They value liquidity. So the dollar is a safe haven, and people rush into it in a crisis. I think that has benefited the dollar. And finally, the Fed in the last 12 years, since the global financial crisis, has done some really extraordinary things to buttress or strengthen the role of the dollar, extending big credit lines, swap lines to central banks around the world, to the European Central Bank, to the Swiss National Bank, to other banks, to the Bank of England, and to 4 emerging market central banks as well. And that guarantee of you can get dollars when you need them makes foreign central banks and governments and firms more comfortable about their continued reliance on the dollar. So, I'm an economist, so inevitably the answer is a combination of factors have contributed to the dollar's surprising dominance. You have faded out.
Oh, sorry. Do you hear me now?
I do.
Okay. Well, sorry. I'm a bit new with this. The book comes from, I believe, a French Privilège Exorbitant, I think. You were saying the book actually mentions that it was used as a trans, especially in the newspapers. And I was wondering, or actually, yeah, I was wondering, what are the real privileges, the real advantages the United States has in having the dollar as the main, the global currency? As in, your book does talk about the fact that practically other countries are giving the United States 500 billion, I think it was. But what are some other advantages that the United States has from this arrangement?
Yeah, so the phrase exorbitant privilege comes from 1965 when French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing complained about the dollar's asymmetric singular role in the global financial system and asked, why doesn't the French franc have the same advantages that the dollar does? And I think those advantages are convenience for US banks and firms. They can do business around the world in their own currency, which is convenient, lowers their costs of operating a little bit. The US Treasury can borrow a little bit more cheaply because there's this captive demand for US Treasury bonds. Central banks around the world hold like $500 billion worth of them. And number 3, the dollar kind of provides automatic insurance to the United States. So when a bad thing happens to the world economy and financial markets tank, people rush into the dollar. That safe haven characteristic that I described before. So even when the United States is responsible for the bad thing, even when Lehman Brothers crashed in 2008, and we put global financial markets into a tailspin, everybody rushed into the dollar. Other markets were collapsing, but the dollar was stable or strengthening. So that automatic insurance is valuable as well. So those are the main categories by my thinking: convenience, lower borrowing costs, and insurance.
We have two last questions, if it's not a problem. Two remaining questions. The first one would be, what would be the pros and cons of a multipolar currency world? I'm not so sure how I could name it. And yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I would argue the pros dominate in that we would have the ability to provide liquidity to the global system commensurate with its needs, rather than relying on a United States which comprises over time a shrinking share of the world economy as the sole source of liquidity. We would have a better diversified supply of liquidity to the global system. So if something interrupted its provision by the United States, that liquidity could still be obtained from Europe or China or wherever. It's like having a diverse ecosystem is better ecologically. Having a diverse financial system would be better. The downside that people worry about is that if there would be multiple sources of liquidity to the global economy, there's the danger that if investors worried that something was going wrong in one of the suppliers, they would rush out of dollars because there would be something else to rush into, euros or renminbi or whatever, and you would end up with much more exchange rate volatility and financial volatility more generally. So I think the benefits would dominate the risks, but people disagree.
Wow, that was an amazing answer. Thank you very much. Well, the last question, I'm actually going to have to read it, is, oh yeah, do you vision, or can you see a way in which the United States can keep this exorbitant privilege? Or a way we could kind of keep this privilege? Yeah, that's the question. Or is it almost impossible? Or do you see a scenario where we can actually keep this privilege?
Well, as I said, I think the dollar's exorbitant privilege is not sustainable if the U.S. share of global finance and trade and GDP continues to fall, because China and other emerging markets will grow more rapidly than a mature economy like the United States. And I think the logic of what economists call convergence, that developing countries will converge toward the living standards of the advanced economies, grow faster than the advanced economies, in other words, is that logic is compelling. But if you're of the view that the United States is a nimble, mature economy, that our response to the COVID crisis has been more forceful and better, if that's your view, than that of other mature economies like those of Europe, then the US could conceivably continue to grow strongly. If you think we're about to have a burst of productivity growth as firms reorganize how they do business in the wake of COVID, fast US growth, which people are now forecasting for the next year or so, were that to continue, then the dollar could maintain its current role. So I think, that monetary and financial status is rooted in, real economic performance. So if you're an optimist about the prospects for the U.S. economy, then the dollar's role is more sustainable than if you're a pessimist about U.S. economic prospects.
If it's not a problem, my friend Luca Bazzoni would have two questions. I hope it's not a problem.
Good afternoon, Professor Eichengreen, or good morning. I don't know if you're in the West Coast. Before you mentioned that the ECB, the ECB enacting QE is preventing the euro from gaining prominence worldwide. How exactly would that work? And you also mentioned that the dollar being a safe haven during crisis has a positive effect. Is a positive effect on the U.S. economy. But wouldn't capital markets, international capital markets, rushing into the dollar decrease exports due to an appreciating dollar? So yeah, these are my two questions.
Very good questions, both. On the second one, you're right that the safe haven character of the dollar is a bit of a mixed blessing. If the dollar strengthens in a crisis, that does make U.S. exports less competitive. But in a financial crisis, the main problem is what's going on in financial markets. That and not ability to export was the big thing that countries and governments had to worry about in 2008, 2009. So I think on balance, the U.S. benefits from having that form of insurance. On the other question about the European Central Bank quantitative easing and the euro's international role, the broader context is that the different international roles of the dollar kind of fit together and reinforce one another. Central banks hold dollars as reserves. Firms invoice their exports in dollars. International bonds are denominated in dollars. And if one of these things isn't true, the other two are less likely to be true. So a big constraint on the euro acquiring a more important international role is it's hard for central banks to hold euros as reserves because there simply aren't enough AAA rated euro area government bonds. Last time I looked, only 4 European governments with AAA ratings, Germany, the Netherlands, and 2 others that escape my mind. Austria, who's the 4th one, I don't know, that escape my mind at the moment. And the more of those bonds that are held by the European Central Bank, the less are left over to be held by central banks and governments around the world as reserves. So the fact that the ECB is vacuuming up so many euro area bonds, and its capital key requires it to buy the AAA rated bonds in a certain proportion to all its overall bond purchases, that's a problem. And the fact that bank regulators require banks in the euro area to hold government bonds as to satisfy their capital requirements further diminishes the stock of AAA rated euro area government bonds available to reserve managers in the rest of the world.
Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry, but I have another question. A friend of mine just asked me, what is, in monetary terms, what advantage does this exorbitant privilege actually mean? So I'm guessing that he's asking us, how much money how much money do we make in excess, as in...
Right. So your friend is asking me, can I put a overall number on the convenience value I described before, on the lower borrowing costs that I described before, on the automatic insurance I described before? And the answer is no. So I don't do that in the book. Other people have tried to do that. And I think the calculations are dicey. I don't know exactly how to value insurance. How much lower U.S. borrowing costs are depends on circumstances. So under normal circumstances, they might be a whole lot lower as a result of the dollar's exorbitant privilege. But right now, interest rates on government bonds are 0 everywhere. So they're not going to go lower. And Europe and Japan and other parts of the world enjoy those rock bottom interest rates, even if their currencies don't have the same exorbitant privilege.
Thank you so very much, Professor Eichengreen. Thank you so much for your time. And I think with this, we're finished today's interview with the wonderful Professor Eichengreen. And we've finished, I'm guessing. Well, actually, I'm sure. Thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome. It was fun.